You don't sell the land that your ancestors walked on, and now their bones lie beneath. The offer is turned away. President Grant, in frustration, finally goes to the War Department. He talks to his friends, William Tecumseh Sherman and Phil Sheridan. Together, those two old boys are going to come up with a plan to force the Sioux back onto reservations in the Dakotas, get them out of the way, sweep them out of the way for the final time. And if you remember, William Tecumseh Sherman and Phil Sheridan burned down nearly half the South in the war between the states. They know what total war is. They're going to try to wage it again on the northern plains. They're going to issue an edict to the Sioux. It goes like this: get out of the Black Hills. Get out of the Powder River country. Get out of the Rosebud country and go back to your respective reservations in the Dakotas and stay there. And do so by January 31st, 1876, because if you don't, you're going to be considered hostile, and the army will come and get you and force you to return. Runners are sent out to inform the villages of this edict, but it's a bitter winter, the winter of 75 and 76. Howling winds, drifting snow, 40 below zero on the northern plains, not uncommon. You cannot move a village wintertime. There's no grass for the ponies. But more commanding than the weather itself is the counsel from Sitting Bull, who says to the people, don't go back. Don't go back to that reservation. You're a fool to make yourself a slave over a piece of fat bacon and some coffee and sugar. Stay out. Live like a real Indian while you still can, while you can still hunt buffalo. He knew the sun was going down. By the early spring, those who'd wintered on the agencies began to trickle off and reinforce Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse out here. And by the early summer of 76, they're pouring off the reservations. So much so that by the day of this fight, June 25th, 1876, there's a village about a mile to the south of us, down in the river valley bottom where all of those trees are. There's 8,000 people in that camp. 1,500 to 2,000 of them are warriors. They're not going back. No more bad flour, no more rotten meat, no more broken promises, no more. No more. The stage is set. Phil Sheridan is going to bring 3 military columns into this field out of the south. General George Crook, Fort Fetterman, Wyoming Territory. Famed Apache fighter George Crook. 1,000 soldiers are going to come up out of Fort Fetterman, Wyoming. 260 Crow and Shoshone auxiliaries. They want to fight the Sioux for free. They hate the Sioux. Out of the west, 200 miles from here, Fort Ellis, Bozeman, Montana Territory. 500 soldiers will march down the Yellowstone with Colonel John Gibbon. Gibbon walks like this because he stopped Pickett's charge at Gettysburg and was wounded. His Crow scouts call him No Hip. And out of the east, Fort Abraham Lincoln, Bismarck, Dakota Territory, 400 miles away. 1,000 soldiers under the direct command of General Alfred Terry, second in command, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, all 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry. Each one of these military columns will descend on this area, and each one of them is expected to act independently from one another should they strike the warrior force, because they cannot communicate. They have no cell phones, no beepers, no pagers. They're hundreds of miles apart, and they cannot communicate. And if they cannot communicate, they cannot coordinate. You're on your own. 8 days before this battle, June 17th, 1876, George Crook is 30 miles to the south of us, coming up out of Wyoming. He goes into camp along Rosebud Creek at 8 o'clock in the morning. He's got 1,000 soldiers with him. Crazy Horse, fearless, aggressive, relentless, and hostile against any white intrusion into the Powder River country. You see, Crazy Horse, at the age of about 14, has a vision. The Great Spirit comes to him in a dream and says, you are to protect your people. That's why you're born. That's why you'll die. Bullets and arrows will never slay you. But don't boast. Don't brag. Don't draw attention to yourself. Be humble and reserved. That's real tough assignment, folks, in a warrior culture that's all about bravado. It's all about heroics. Quite honestly, it's much like the NFL today. But Crazy Horse is very different. When he goes into a fight, unlike other warriors, he doesn't paint himself lavishly. He doesn't wear his finest clothing. He simply puts one feather in his hair, ties a brown pebble behind his ear, paints a lightning bolt on his face, hailstones on his chest, paints hail spots on his horse, ties his horse's tail up, grabs a handful of prairie dog dust in his Winchester rifle, and goes to war. Other warriors follow him by the hundreds.